Welcome to the Coaching Family Soccer Coaching Podcast, a podcast for soccer coaches from grassroots to the pro game. Soccer coaches who love the game, love coaching, and want to get better. Join our community on Twitter at Coaching Family.
So guys, welcome back to the Coaching Family Soccer Coaching Podcast. Joined as ever by my good friend, Glen Hicks. Glen, how you doing, pal?
Good, thanks, mate. We've got great weather in London, so I'm in good spirits.
Good. It's about 35 degrees here where I am, so, you know,
it's not that good here.
But, you know. Yeah. Anyway, let's cut to the chase. So today we're talking about possession. Lovely little sort of continuation or flow from the last show. We talked about the 1v1 duel, the individual stuff. It's like, you know, so we go from almost that individual possession into group possession. So what's your general thoughts here? Any general thoughts on coaching possession?
Yeah, it's a good starting point there, because that's where I always start as well. So to be honest, again, I know I've probably said this like a strapline. I keep bringing it back to the individual, and doesn't matter what possession practice you set up. Of course, you want it age relative and age specific, but it always comes back to the individual ball responsibilities for me. You've still got to be able to receive the ball well, retain the ball well individually, whether that's big space or little space. You've got to release the ball well, so your ball striking and your passing technique's got to be good. And then on the flip side of it, in any possession practice, you've got to be really good at retrieving the ball. So I zoom in on all of those techniques and skills to come out within the practice first and foremost, and then build it from there. Yeah.
I mean, the key areas. If you're thinking like about bigger picture stuff, so I think about, you know, for example, you know, we look at the modern game, Guardiola, you know, what he's done to change football in this country. You know, that is the benchmark in terms of possession. Do you know what I mean? His Barcelona team and what Man City do. That's the sort of pinnacle, isn't it? Where you want to get to if you're working on, if they're, you know, if you want to keep the ball, because they're so good at it. So the question is how you get there, and then how do you coach the kids, the players, the young players, the boys and girls to sort of get that possession in there. And we've always talked about, you know, I talk about it a lot. I know, you know, we've had the discussion about, you know, when and where to do it. You know, for example, the rondos, which we could talk about a little bit, and how, you know, I always go back to the same analogy. You know, when we were working at Tottenham, we had the under 9s and, you know, the under 10s, we were just solely focusing on individual possession. You know, we had the 9s group, we didn't do any group possession at all, no possession at all, you know, and, you know, that the outcomes of that were obviously amazing in small sided 6v6, you know, tight spaces. And then, you know, playing 8v8, we get absolutely hammered and turned over. But then moving up into the 9v9 when they got to an under 11s, and because I was lucky enough to coach those same age groups, the ones with Oliver Skipping and a few of those boys, the one who won the under 17s World Cup. You know, what I noticed that when we did introduce group possession, it was so much easier, you know, introducing that 11, because technically they were so good. They were so unbelievably technically good in individual possession. When we went into that group possession stuff and then teaching that, you know, those, you know, getting your head up and play, it was so much easier for them to play one touch, because they had all that individual technical ability. And then the bonus of that is also then they could break lines with the ball at their feet. They could dribble with the breaking lines. They could also pass, move, and get their head up. So, but I always revert back to that. You know, we're talking about, you know, when I see the stuff like on socials with the under 7s and under 8s doing loads of rondo and possession stuff, which I'm not saying anything wrong with that necessarily, but if you go too far that way, is that when do you get the individual possession stuff? You know what I mean? It's a lot more difficult to teach someone to beat a player with the ball at their feet rather than to get your head up and find a pass. What's your thoughts on that?
So when you look at the lad you mentioned there, Skippy, for example, and obviously we've both worked with him at some point in various age groups within the academy, but Harry Kane, I think, is a perfect example for that model. And the stuff I was talking about, linking it back to the 1v1 duel, about them finding their place. Harry Kane's found himself at the top end of the pitch, but he still has their midfield attributes, like we said before. And a lot of that comes from the 1v1 domination and then going into possession practice as he gets older and more refining his skills. But, you know, again, you look at his passing the other day. So he's exceptional at retaining the ball, you know, he twists and turns, he secures the ball well. But his passing, for example, I just think it's one of the best in the world. It's not a case of, you know, I don't think it's even debatable anymore, especially that penetrating pass or that final pass like he does to Son. And what that is, maybe that comes from at such a young age, being able to play under maximum pressure. You kind of become pressure proof. you can become pressure resistant. It doesn't matter how many players are clambering over your back because of the phone box stuff and whatever else. And then, like you say, when you all of a sudden got 1 or 2 players on an overload and you got a little bit more time and space on a bigger pitch as you grow, the game becomes a lot easier. And I agree with you. I think that's one of the key things we should always work out. We've got to be careful with possession. So with the young ones, so I'll play, that's a 3v1 box, whatever size you want to do it, 8x8 or 10x10, whatever. You can still work on the 3 and say, we're going to work out a pass and receiving today. But I always really obsess about what the one's got to do. So actually that, don't just neglect the one in the middle. So if that one is trying to retrieve the ball, encourage good retrieving of the ball, but then it almost becomes like a phone box game. So now you've got to wriggle your way out of the square. Don't just kick it out of play. Don't just toe poke it out. That's not good enough. When you win it, can you break out of this box that you're in? So it's almost against one versus 3. So there's a really extreme element of technique there as well within the practice.
Yeah, you talk about 3v1s. I mean, I still say, because obviously we're talking about rondos, and I might question coaches when using them, over reliant on them. But for me, it's still the best way to teach possession in terms of introducing key principles of possession. Your 3v1s, your 4v2s, your 5v2s. For me, that's the best way in terms of talking about players in terms of, working, finding angles of support, playing there, inviting pressure in, playing around pressure, that sort of thing. So they're really important tools. I'm not a big fan of the 4v1 unless they're real beginners. I find that a little bit static, just players standing in the square. But I definitely like big fan of that, 3v1, players in the square rather than on the line around the outside, like players in there. So there's a lot more movement, the onus on the players to find those angles, find that space to stretch the pitch. And then going to 4v2, I love a little 4v2, like playing nice quickly. If I'm a big advocate of working on third man runs as much as possible. And working in the 4v2s or like 5v2s, or those little concepts where you can get those split passes out. I think they're really, really, really powerful as well. I mean, I go back to those times again, working with those 11s groups and working up possession. And for me, it was always that those little practices there, and also then just creating overloads in small-sided games, and then having that, for example, 4v4 plus 1. And maybe using the use of the magic man or floaters, it could be even a topic in itself for a whole show. But I find that really, I remember Chris telling me one actually say he doesn't like floaters because it comes all about the floater, all about the magic man. But I was like, for me, for the onus is like, I'm stressing the player is that, look, there's a spare pass on the pitch somewhere. Do you know what I mean? So your onus to get your head up and find it quick. So it's about that awareness, that balance to find it. So because there's no excuse, it's a 4v4 plus 1. Do you know what I mean? Find where the overload is and play that pass quick, or, drive them in, that sort of thing. So I think that's a real powerful tool as well to use for it. And obviously then, working up the age groups, you've got your 44 plus 3s and all those sorts of things as well.
Yeah, I think again, it's about the skill of the coach there, though, so in your session design. So you could put a magic man in the session, but you can position him somewhere different. So if you've got a young centre-back at under 9, under 10s that needs to work on the ball under less pressure, you put him at the bottom end of the box and say, right, that little zone at the bottom end is unopposed. So he's actually got time to get his head up and serve his forward passes. And there'll be enough pressure on the forward pass anyway, because he's playing into like a central midfield area. So there's already enough pressure on that forward pass. If you want to pick up that magic man and dump him right in the middle of the box, so now it's a 3v3, but plus 1 in the middle of a box, he's working more like a number 10. So he's got to find the space within the area. If you do the opposite and you place that magic man at the top end of the box and you say, well, actually, we're playing a little 3v3 here, but the game is hit the 9. You wrap it up to the number 9 and he's on, like, maybe make a little offside line. You've got 2 mannequins there and say, right, your job is to stay onside, but be a target. So that little player now is still a magic man, but he's focusing as like a hold. Can he receive it? And then we say, okay, whoever hits the number 9, like you just said about the third man run, someone from your team can make a run beyond him and he can slide you in like a Harry Kane. So it's about how you use that magic man as well. Do you know what I mean? And to flip it on its head, so I sometimes do the opposite, and I call it the Kante role. Sometimes put that extra player in there to be a spoiler of the possession game. So if you've got a 3v3 or a 2v2, whatever your numbers are, and you say, right, you know what, they're dominating the ball so well, I want a little bit more pressure just at the ball. Put someone in there for a minute at a time and say, right, your job is to be like Kante. Can you go and work on your retrieving and just hustle this ball? Go and sprint and press. When you win the ball, pop it back to the coach or give them an out pass target. So again, it's just about how you use that magic man skillfully, I think.
It's funny.
At different outcomes.
Yeah, because funny, because I did a session last night actually in over here, and same had 16 players or whatever. So I had 2 3v3s to 2 targets going at the same time, and then +1, so 3v2 +1, so 1 magic man each. And on one of them, I noticed that one team was just popping it. It was just too easy. So I took the magic man out and made him actually go for the other team. So the other team was underloaded. I suppose that's what you say, isn't it? So just seeing that actually that one's functioning really well. And actually that one maybe was more balanced. This one here, actually, they need to be underloaded to give them the challenge. And I suppose really, you're talking about the football at the highest level. That's the sort of, we're trying to develop players who can play underloaded, right?
Definitely, mate. And like I said, I used free players to help design the session. So I'll try and link it together, for example. So you've got 3 groups of 3. Let's say you've got 9 players. Sometimes you can have a random number like that, right? And if you just set up, let them play in one box first, and you've got a 3v3 and then a spine of 3 players. And again, whether you want to put that spine, so you've got 3 oranges and 3 yellows in the middle, and 3 pinks become your spine. So you've got 1 at the top end like a 9, 1 at the bottom end like a 5 or 6, and 1 in the middle like just an extra player. So you've got a massive overload. But yes, you get a lot of dominant possession, a lot of receiving skills, but you still get your 1v1 stuff. And again, you can manipulate that by making the area tighter, and you'll get even more stuff under pressure where they have to use their skill to get out. If you then just add another box to that, Saul, and we play, okay, we've still got 9 players, and we go, right, now we've got a 10 by 10 box, and it's adjoined to another 10 by 10 box. You can play a similar game, but with different outcomes. So now 3 yellows are in one box, 3 pinks are in the other box. The 3 blues or the other team are now defending the middle line and pressing the ball. So all you say is you put 2 on the middle line and 1 player comes in to press the ball. So you now got a 3v1, but the objective is more directional now. Like you said about the penetrating pass, that game changer, that split pass. So the 3 pinks are keeping it, but you tell them your objective is how many times can you play through this middle line? So now you've got the yellows popping the ball, but now you encourage them to look for the forward pass. Can you play the split pass or that one down the sides and you get it across to the other team? They play the pass through. As the game transfers, 1 from the line goes and presses, the other one squeezes up to the line. So on a defensive side of it as well, so they're learning the game. You've got 1 lad pressing the ball and the other 2 working on not just standing there like kids often do, but you're encouraging them to look. You're not chasing the ball or pressing the ball. You're putting pressure on the pass. So can you look to screen a forward pass and block it? Then you get all your Busquets work, where are they looking for the pass? And again, it's just how you structure the session to get the different outcomes, I think.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I use the same sort of practice there. You've got that middle zone. You've got to try and play through the middle zone to a spare player. And then, it's almost a 3v3 plus 3, but there's like a 4v2 in there with 2 extra ones at the top sort of thing. So I like that as well. But so that you mentioned the word directional there, and I think that's a real interesting key word, isn't it? I remember I did on my A license, I had a session about trying to play through 2 middle pivot players, and I did like a warm up, did like a 5v2 rondo, all the players. And, and I was just talking about, obviously, like, trying to stretch the middle 2 to try and play through, possible if not playing around type thing. And the feedback was like, oh yeah, but, maybe you could make it a bit more directional if, if you had it, for example. And I was like, oh yeah, but, I just want loads and loads of volume. And they were like, yeah. And I remember a guy called Shane who works at Northampton, the top coach, nice guy, who said, yeah, actually maybe, because I was saying I want more volume. He goes, well, maybe when you're working with older players at the top end, it could be much more, it's more position specific, if you like. And so it's less about volume and more about volume of actual realistic where they're going to play. And I think when working recently with Dan Machichi, Arsenal, I think is one of the best coaches I've ever seen in the world. Unbelievable in terms of him. He does a similar sort of 4v2 or 5v2 where it's similar, you put to 2 goals and then you've got to play around. So you've got 2 defenders in the middle or 3 in the middle. They've got to try and win it, and if they win it, they go press, they can score. But then you've got your goalie, you've got your fullbacks playing out wide. So it's much more position specific, if that makes sense. And I think, actually, I think that's what we do. If we're working with the younger ones, you just want lots of different, volume of different interpretations of seeing as a left and a right and a split. And can you find a split? Whereas when you're getting older, it is much more right. Yeah, if my fullbacks there, I want them in that fullback position, receiving it and trying to play forward or trying to play through the middle and giving them as much realistic opportunities to replicate what's going to happen in their game time, right?
Yeah, I think it's as much as that about, I think it's about concepts and context. So if you're playing that simple game, like we said, like I love the 1v1 combat zone and 2v2 like you do with the 2 targets, it becomes like 4v2 or 3v1, right? But for me, the concepts still remain the same. So you've got depth, you've got height, and you've got a core in that game. The only thing really missing from that game is width, because you ain't got outside players, right? So if in all of our possession games, we're introducing concepts of the game and basic team structure, well, you can get that. The minute you've got 3 players, you can get that because you've got someone deep, you've got someone giving you height like a number 9 or a winger, forward player, and you've got a core. And if you introduce them concepts, that doesn't matter now. If we double them numbers and we go 6v6 rather than 3v3, well, actually, you just had 2 players on the outside. Now you've got like a winger or a fullback. So guys, understand the concept. Your responsibility in this game now, from a game point of view, is if you're a Trent, you're giving us width and height, maybe, or width and depth, depending on where the ball is, but you're giving us width first and foremost. So stay out there, play from there. And again, if you just drop that in as a concept under 9, well, then you just continue to grow the concept. And again, the concept of a forward pass is a forward pass, in my opinion. And yes, there's different types. Of course, we can get into the nuances and the intricacies of disguise, delay, timing. But then the situation just changes. So if I'm a centre half, I'm Van Dijk and I'm playing into midfield at halfway line, I'm playing a slightly less pressured pass with a bit more space. If I'm David Silva turning on the half turn 30 yards from goal, or young Joe Bloggs near the penalty box, and I'm playing a forward pass like Harry Kane or like Højbjerg the other night when he clipped a lovely one through to Kane, or a Dennis Bergkamp style pass, of course, there's more technical detail, there's more precision. But again, that's about understanding concepts. And for me, the game doesn't change. If I am 9 years old, Saul, and I'm trying to play that little threaded pass through the Ivan Needle, I think in terms of the concept and what's required as a skill, it's the same as the top level, but obviously diluted down. Because if you're Johnny at grassroots or Kevin De Bruyne in the Premier League, of course, there's more pressure on it. But you know what I mean? If we're putting concepts in there, we're going to practice, we can grow.
Yeah, I mean, but I suppose the argument is that how you want to link it back to that player's experiences in their specific position in the game as many as possible. Because I agree, because if I want to try and find a split pass, I want to find a split pass, but it might be, I'm a fullback, playing it through the middle players or playing it back for a strike or whatever. It's always a split, but maybe that, if I'm a right back, I want to be trying to receive it, off onto my right side and try to play forward or cut away, that sort of thing. I suppose you make it a little bit more specific. But I mean, I still think there's always an argument. Listen, I love those 4v2 games. I mean, even in warm-ups, I told you the other day, those split passes, I think they work all over the pitch. What about, another thinking back about Guardiola and his height at Barcelona, I remember quite vividly, and we're trying to keep the ball all the time. I remember going to Chelsea actually, and at one point Neil Barr was talking about he thought that there was too much possession, maybe not enough direction. Do you know what I mean? And sort of we went too far that way. We've gone from English football, just sticking it in the channels or in a mixer or, like a hot potato, to maybe having too much. I remember a couple of coaches talk about it as well. Everything's too tight spaces. They've gone too tight and they want to do that. What's your thoughts on that?
Again, I think that's, and I don't want to sound like I'm not answering the question, sitting on the fence here, but I think that's about. So I heard Xavi talking the other day about instincts and intuition of Pedri and Gavin, all these young players. And it seems like, the other night, what manifested the 4-0 win against Barca, I think all that's happened is Xavi has returned to Barcelona and reminded everyone at the club, this is what we do at Barcelona, because they've got a similar group of players. I know he's gone and bought some forward players that give him a bit of penetration, but And that comes from having a philosophy. So, and again, I think it comes down to what your values are. So when you're coaching kids, if you've got a philosophy that streamlines through, if you're lucky enough to work at a club like that, then they're going to be developing core values and the way they want to play, and in terms of concepts of the game and stuff like that. But I think it's really important to be consistent with messages when you're coaching, whatever it is you're trying to develop. Does that make sense in terms of what your philosophy is? What are we trying to achieve here? What are we trying to get out of the session? And again, if it's, for example, as is a 1v1 domination philosophy, then keep bringing it back to that. Where did it fall down on the 1v1 domination or outplaying, or however we want to word it?
Yeah.
But
I just think if you think about youth development, my take is you mentioned Barcelona, and I'm lucky when we had Albert Capellas on the show, he was academy director of Barca. He's gone back now to academy director of Barcelona. I did an interview with him as well. They talk about Superman there, where basically they want their players to play like Superman. So they make everything really tight and everything really speed and everything really quick. And I use the analogy similar from my ball mastery and the 1v1 stuff. You want your players to play like Superman. They can do anything on the ball because they're used to playing such a high intensity in such a tight spaces. And like you said before as well, it's easier to coach players to play in a bigger space than it is in a harder to coach to play in a tighter space. It's also easier, I think, to get players to play forward quicker rather than to keep the ball. I think keeping the ball was really difficult. So I don't actually, if I'm thinking about it, I don't mind no, maybe not with the younger ages, but when especially getting to YDP, maybe they are overdoing it a bit. Maybe they are keeping it a bit too much. You know, maybe are dominating possession and maybe not having enough actions on goal. Maybe you sacrifice that because it is so difficult to keep the ball. Do you know what I mean? And if you can, like say, develop a culture where players really want to dominate the ball, dominate possession, then those other things, that leads to those other things. You know, you say like the other team can't score a goal if you've got the ball. So maybe you do allow them to have a little bit too much possession, overcook it a little bit, wherever you want to talk about it, because maybe down the road you're thinking, yeah, well, when they get to 18, wow, if they're still popping it like that, they've been doing that since they were 11 and 12 and they just pop it. Like you say, and that's in the club DNA, isn't it? Rather than thinking, you know, let's just get it and that's enough of that kind of break the lines and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and again, it's about consistency of your philosophy and stuff like that. But I would say one of the most frustrating things is so when you watch a lovely warm-up, you know, on the side of the pitch, and I've seen this on a first-team pitch or semi-pro pitch and a grassroots pitch, where they play a little keep ball session before the game. It's all popping, and then as soon as they kick off, they just shell it. They just pump it up the pitch. And I think, well, you might as well have been practicing that. Play it into your number 9 and practice that as a warm-up. So I think as long as they're trying to do the right stuff, and what I mean by the right stuff is it not always got to look pretty, but they're trying to play a technical game or a possession-based game where you're bringing out lots of stuff. You're giving them, so the more you kick a ball over a kid's head, a child's head, and the ball goes long, that they're missing out on tons of stuff. They're missing out on movement stuff. They're missing out on receiving stuff. They're missing out on retaining stuff under pressure. There's loads of stuff you're missing out on as much as it's the easy way. And I just think, going back to the intuition and instincts thing, Saul, I think when you look at, so Busquets, I think he's going to take the baton on from Xavi in terms of being the next manager. I can see him at 45. He'll take the baton on. And that comes from intelligence, doesn't it? And I think a big thing with possession, Saul, is the when and the why. I think what separates some of these young Barcelona players, for example, and we're using them as the pinnacle, or young Manchester City players now, and Guardiola's implemented, is there's a level of intelligence there where they're such sensory footballers that they just know, they have this feel for the game in terms of timing. And that's about, when do we be progressive? When do we penetrate and really go for them? And when do we just put our foot in and be patient now? And again, I think that's a skill. So I don't think there's one set way. I think we have to have that understanding of coaches if we're going to impart it on our players in terms of concepts of, do you know what I mean? Really understanding possession.
What's your thoughts then, as for example, an academy football team, 13, 14 is just sticking it behind the team, sticking it in the mixer, sticking it, to the channels. I mean, I still see when my colleagues tell me, oh yeah, we played Team A the other day. They just basically launching it into the number 9 and not a quick kind of break, just literally just sticking it in the channels.
Of course, I'm a bit of a purist, and ideally, if we could all just collect our players and coach our players with as much time as possible, we probably all want to play a certain style. But there's value to it as well. That's all. The beauty of football is you can play the game any way you want.
But let's come on, man. Let's get off that fence, mate. There's value to everything. But I'm talking about playing it all the time. Is there value to players? So what would be the argument to just having the philosophy is that with what are you preparing your players for? I mean, maybe that's true. Maybe look, we're spoiled. I'm massively spoiled. The clubs I've worked at, that they are trying to develop players for the Champions League, for the Premier League. Do you know what I mean? And maybe there's loads of confirmation bias in there, and like I say, we're purists. But then you try and say, what is the argument for playing that way? Is it then maybe you're trying to develop players for not that level of football? Not sure. I mean, listen, I mean, like I say, I'll hold your hands. I'm a football purist, if I can, because we work in youth development and the clubs we work for.
Well, at senior level, if you're talking about senior level, well, if you ask Stoke City, would they want to go back to the football that Tony Pulis was playing and guarantee top 10 in the Premier League? Or if you ask the Burnley fan, are you pleased with being in the Premier League the last 8 years? I think their answer would be, look, we're a Premier League team, we're probably overachieving. But with youth football, so I would say there are outcomes though. So if you want to develop a Harry Kane or a Lewandowski, it makes sense. If you just play and you're incredibly patient and you go too far that way, well, actually, a lot of the hold-up play and the penalty box play, becoming a penalty box master. Well, if you're not getting the ball in the box, even getting on bits and pieces in the box, there's huge value to that. You become a fox in the box like a Defoe or whatever else. Yeah. But again, there's a huge difference there. So with playing a long pass, for me, it's about purpose, intent, and control. And I say that to the kids, pick your pass. If you're playing with purpose, if you're playing with good intent, if I can see your intent, but you get the pass wrong, and if you're playing with control, then that's completely different. But obviously, if we're just shelling up the pitch every time, that's not good for anyone. Do you know what I mean? But even Sam Allardyce or Sean Dyche don't play like that. They play with two very good centre forwards. There's fantastic forward passing, and I'm in youth development, right? To be honest, me personally, I'm against it. So I don't mind the long pass. I don't mind them putting in the box. If they look up and they see a young Harry Kane in the box, put it in the box. He's got to learn to cross it, control it, play in the penalty box. But with youth football, Saul, you know, you only have to be in it for 3, 4, 5 years, and we've been in it a long time to know that you lose much more than you gain that you're never going to get back. You won't get the time to get that stuff back, and the stuff we're talking about, the courage and all that on the ball and the technical quality.
Yeah, and then I suppose then you look at the other way, like you talked about. You look at someone like Liverpool, Klopp's Liverpool. They like to play forward quickly, but as you said, it's forward pass, isn't it? It's counter. Win the ball, counter press, play forward quickly, breaking lines. That's different, isn't it, to what we just talked about there? That's a different, that's about, possession quickly, directed play forward, isn't it? I mean, they still play. I remember Solskjaer was battering Klopp, wasn't he, at one point many years ago, saying, they just, go long. But I mean, it's different to just sticking in channels to try and adapt. Seeing Alisson with Salah open, playing that 30, 40-yard pass, long pass into feet or just in front of him, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if you think the money that Liverpool paid for Andy Carroll, for example, all the way back then, he's an excellent footballer. He's still chipping away in the Championship right now. But he's a different type of footballer. You couldn't put Andy Carroll in this Liverpool team and they wouldn't function the same way. If you look at all their forwards, so they're all an average height. Like Diogo Jota's got to be, 5'8". They're all a similar kind of height. Mane's not the tallest in the world. Firmino's probably the biggest. But they play forward quickly, but they know that, wow, we've got incredible movement, creativity, pace, power, and exceptional finishing across the board. Like, they're all chipping in with goals. I think they're getting like 10 goals each on average. So to them, it makes sense to play that heavy metal rock and roll football, whatever it is that Klopp calls it. But that's not neglecting the midfielders. I think they just play through the midfielders a lot quicker. I think that's why maybe Thiago's had to find his place and settle in. He didn't quite adjust at first because you play a lot more possession-based stuff at Barca and Bayern where he's been previously. And I think he's adapting now as well. And you're seeing his longer range passes come into play a lot more as well. So it's interesting. But
I thought they brought in Thiago for that thing, trying to break down a low block a lot more when they, teams were saying, all right, so for example, those teams at bottom of the table think, we're playing Liverpool, we're going to let them have it rather than, get sucked up, let them break the ball, win it back, and sit in a low block and never went for a phase in there, struggling against those teams below that. I thought that's why they brought him to have a bit more, directed possession in the middle there.
I think that's really important. So, and I think going back to the kids as well. So if we plan backwards, so if we look at the top end and say, what does this young lad, is it Diaz, the new Liverpool player? What does the new lad, what has he got? So what they've added with him is creativity. And I think bringing it back to the kids as a fundamental element that needs to be in all of your sessions is creativity. I can't stand anything worse than watching a possession session at any level and every single pass is just so predictable. Like, you go, right, I know where he's going now, I know where he's going, I know where he's going. To have that ability like a Busquets to look one way and just turn your hips and pull a pass on the inside the other way. Or for me, that's what this lad's brought to Liverpool, and he might be the difference with winning the league title. This lad Diaz, he's got this effervescence about him, so isn't he? He's got this playground, this young footballer coming out vibrant, full of energy, courageous. All of the personal qualities we're talking about, we want in our young players. The lad's courageous. He took a hit from the goalkeeper the other day, so he's brave in the penalty box. He's creative. His first goal was a statement for me. He's just dinked it over the goalkeeper, and it's hard to come into a Liverpool team like that and add something. But this kid's added something, and I think we've got to coach that stuff in kids as well, that creativity and that audacity.
Yeah, I mean, you made a good point. You're looking at the top level and sort of winding back. You look at that. You look at like Liverpool. Excuse me. Look at Liverpool. You look at Man City, in particular. They keep the ball well, but they're so good in 1v1 domination around the park. They've got those real technicians and those players to do that. I suppose that's what you look for, isn't it? A bit of balance, I suppose. If you go too far one way, then the other way. We talked about Barcelona. There's the arguments maybe that, particularly Spanish football, they're so, obsessed about that possession type, rondo-based play in those tight spaces. Maybe that's why they're not producing loads of number 9s. So, I mean, why there's no more, they're not producing that many people like Torres who can receive and run behind and destroy teams, that sort of thing. For a footballing culture, maybe that's, synonymous of the sorts of, the culture, right? The football culture. You produce those sorts of players. So you're just trying to think, right, so if I'm, how much possession do I work on? Then how much time do I open the pitch up, give my players, that the 9s, like you say, chance to, run behind and run forward, it's having balance, isn't it, in your sessions, how you're approaching sessions, the session design, which was the number one show, isn't it? The first one. It's like, you know, what am I giving to my players to get them ready for the modern game at the highest level, and then also give them those different sorts of experiences, you know what I mean? So you do get those strikers having those opportunities.
Yeah, and I think bringing it back to possession practice, I think, again, if you coach backwards, Saul, from the first team pitch. So one thing that I think they're highly skilled at Barcelona and Xavi is they know how to bring out the best in their players. So they're not trying to get Busquets to be anything other than what Busquets is. And they've added really important stuff to their team. So I remember, if you think back to when Barcelona dominated, so when they had young lads like Teo, Cuenca, they've got David Villa, Henry, you know, they had a lot of pace. And the reason they put pace in the team was to pin the back four and allow the others. And it's interesting that first thing Xavi's done, he's gone out and got Adama Traore, who is like a train. He's so quick. He's got Aubameyang, who actually now with Busquets, Pedri, Gavi and all them, that's bringing out the best in Aubameyang. And we said, you know what, guys, you're going to push the game that way. And again, it's about concepts. This is about young kids getting this in their head as well. Because if you've got a fast kid, you want him to play the right role within the possession. As they grow, this is so under 11 and below, keep it generic, develop it all. But as they grow, if your kid's going to be an Adama Traore, well, you've got to play a game that brings out the best in him. So if that's Pedri playing through balls or switching it quickly to get him in a 1v1 situation with a bit of open space, I think they're really good at getting the best out of the best and actually knowing, really understanding what does our game need. And if you bring that back to kids, you've got to coach backwards from there. And as they grow, make sure you're getting the best out of your individuals as they grow.
But I mean, that's a great example. You looked at that. They develop these possession kings, these possession beasts, and then they buy in their 1v1 players, don't they, really? I mean, the exception maybe of Pedro, but all those other players you mentioned, those wide sort of those 1v1 players, Messi brought in at still 14. I'm not having, you know, the argument that whether he was through an academy or not, but he still brought in. But they, because of that culture, the players they produce, almost, you know, they're producing so many of these midfield possession players. They need to buy in the 1v1 players, the wide players. That makes sense. Which is, you know, that's me just being completely, you know, just as a stereotype, and I don't know that much about that. But it's interesting though, you're thinking about, you know, what sort of players football cultures produce. Do you know what I mean? You know, so if you are really heavily dominant on possession, maybe then you don't produce as many of those sorts of types of players in these other positions. It's an interesting sort of thing, I suppose. And you're thinking about, you know, for us as coaches, whether an academy or a club, you know, what sort of culture am I trying to develop here? What sort of players are we trying to develop? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that thing about culture is really interesting. So I find it fascinating. So if you look at the last 15, 20 years, I think a lot of the real top midfielders have come from, in general, I'm just generalizing, have come from Spain and Germany, for example, like the Cruces of this world and Ozil, and obviously abundance of Spanish ones. But then when you look at the individuals culturally as well, it's interesting to see what they would do in terms of possession games. And if a lot of the creativity and individualist players have come from either Portuguese background or South America, like Diaz coming over now, and there's another one apparently that Man City have bought. I can't remember his name, but they've just paid about 30 million euros for him. But you look at them individual players that come in and add that little bit extra. It's interesting that they are coming from certain cultures, but I think it's about balance, and I think England are starting to get that balance. So I think we've gone a little bit too much one way, because now we've got a dearth of centre halves, haven't we? We're saying where's our we've gone from having Ledley King, John Terry, and again, perhaps they was created Saul from a lot of teams playing 4-4-2, the ball going quite direct. So on the flip side of it, if you've got strikers learning how to attack, you've got centre halves learning how to be really good. Like,
listen, if the ball's getting pumped up into the final 35 minutes, you're getting a lot of contact time, aren't you, in the air and feet and everything. And I suppose, and the inverse of that is, you know, absolutely, well, the reverse of that is, you know, if it's everything small-sided spaces, more everything tick-a-tacker or that sort of thing, maybe they're not getting those experiences.
And I do think so. In terms of the long ball, you know, that possession practice we just said, I think kids, because especially if you're lucky to be on a 3G pitch nowadays, the ball always rolls on the turf. So you play the ball on the turf the whole time. And I think what's happening slightly at times, and again, this is about the trade-off and having the awareness as a coach to recognize it, is kids can't control the ball in the air as much or as good.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So again, to skillfully manipulate that in your session, I do something in that practice we just said. So when you've got the 3 in one box, 3 in the other box, or it could be 4 or 5, depending on your numbers, depending on age. You can go 6v6. You can go 6 in that box with 3 people pressing, or 2, we'll go 6v3. If you just on the halfway line, instead of having the pressers screening it, put a barrier there, right? So now we've got like these Toblerone things, or you can put mini goals, or you can put mannequins. Put a barrier in the way of that line. So now when you're playing possession, you've got a dink or clip a pass over the top of it while the guys are coming in to press you. If you can picture it. So we're playing 5v2, we clip it over the top of the barrier. Now I've got to receive the ball under pressure on my chest, on my thigh aerially, while pressure's coming at me. So again, there's a different outcome there. You're still passing, but you've put a technical element on. First of all, a clip pass, being able to thread that little pass over the top, or a scoop, whatever technique you want to use. And then you've got a different receiving element just by saying, right, I'm cutting the ground out. I'm putting a barrier in the way of some sort. And then it's the same practice, but you're getting a different technical element. And we've got to be careful of different technical elements, because kids have got to be good at receiving the ball in the air.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Well, what's your thoughts on, touch restrictions, which could also be another show in itself, in terms of one touch, two touch, that sort of thing, three touch in these possession sessions?
Yeah, again, I'm all for it. I'm all for it if you know what is your objective. If you always bring it back to your players, and it's like the why. Why are you doing it? If you can justify why you're doing it, if you've got a lad in your session that is far too slow in his thinking, and you want him to see passes a little bit earlier, put him on one touch. Because if you put that little constraint on him and say, no, for the next 5 minutes, you must play one touch. You've got to try and force yourself to play one touch. I want you to try. All of a sudden, they have to. They have no other choice. They can sometimes get a bit lucky with their one-touch passing, but they have to start looking earlier. They have to start planning a pass, scanning and planning a little bit earlier. And yes, it's going to break down quite a bit, because it's quite hard to play one touch in a possession at a young age. But again, if your objective is to speed up their thought process, and then once he's done that, say, okay, now you can play whatever you need. Don't play what you want, play what you need. So if you think you need 3 or 4 touches, stay on the ball. If there was a magnificent one-touch pass on though, and you didn't see it, there's a bit of a problem or a challenge for you. Can you see it? Have you seen that little one round the corner, or that little lovely outside heel flick, that little edge that you do when you bring a player in tight? Do you know what I mean? And it depends what your outcome is. I'm all for it, so as long as you can justify it, and as long as there's a learning outcome and you're developing something, whether it's a technical thing or a football brain thing, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think I would like to say, we talked about before, we live in a world of binary opposites, don't we? It's either no, I can never play, it's not realistic, or yeah, we do it all the time. Like I say, it's when and where, isn't it? What your outcome is going to be. For me, I always also say to players, look, can you try and play quickly? Can you try and do that? I mean, working with some of those Arsenal boys, the 18s, it was like watching them play one touch rondo, 3v2 or 4v2, was unbelievable. The tech, do you know what I mean? You have to play one touch because it's a technical challenge, right? Yeah. But I suppose when and where, like say that players you mentioned earlier, that those 2v2 in the middle to 2 targets, 4 around the side, bang bang, that sort of thing. Like when I'm doing those third man movements, that the target player is not allowed to play through to the next target unless I'm receiving one touch. So you play wide, it comes back, I can split past one touch, and then he can play one touch, that sort of things. Because like I say, what it does is it heightens the intensity, the anxiety, the awareness, the challenge, isn't it? Right, I can play one touch here. If it comes back, I can do the split pass. And like I say, we're going back to those sessions earlier, I was talking about those 3v3 to 1 magic man, or 4v4 1 magic man. Just get your head up. You don't have to play one touch, but the challenge is, can you, before the ball comes, can you just zip it and find a spare pass? If there's a spare pass somewhere on this pitch, you got to find it. That's your challenge. And then, like I say, it goes back to the stuff with Kevin, doesn't it? That scanning things, that suddenly now I'm getting my head up. I'm thinking about what I'm doing. I know, the challenge is, can I play quickly here? Can I find that split pass with one touch? It's a different challenge, isn't it? I've got a bit more awareness. I've got my head up. I'm seeing what's going on around me.
Yeah, definitely. And again, sometimes you do want to speed things up, but I've also had players where, especially if they're naturally fast in their feet in terms of a leg runner, their world is so fast. Like some of these young lads run, they run faster than I can drive my car, some of them. And you think you're going so fast, but at the opposite end of it, so sometimes I want them to slow it down. When they get in the attacking third, they're going so fast, they're running like rabbits, when actually then they just kick the ball off the pitch. But that's because they haven't managed to slow the game down in their head. Like an Henry was the best at it, wasn't he? Absolutely slowing the game down, a little bit more thought, maybe an extra touch. It needs an extra touch here. So then on the flip side of it, sometimes it's good to tell players, put them in a bigger space maybe, but say, look, you have to take 3 touches on the ball, because everyone goes, play 1 and 2 touch, 1 and 2 touch. Well, actually, playing more than 3 touches is, again, it's a part of developing that skill and intuition. It's like, no, put your foot on the ball. You've got a bit of time. Really have a look at the game. Don't be afraid. Goes back to this, linking it to last week, talk about the conducting stuff. Don't be afraid to be the conductor. Just literally put your studs on the ball, have a little walk on the ball, and look at the game. Look at the game now. Where's the best pass? Or have you got to drop your shoulder to break your line, whether you're the centre half or the centre midfielder? Do you know what I mean? And again, that's the skill of coaching. And that sounds like I'm sitting on the fence quite a lot, but it is the skill of coaching, is it? When do you need to get your player to play quicker? When do they need to be slower? And why? Do you understand why and what it is you're asking of your player?
Yeah, it's just that constraint, isn't it? It's like little, maybe Jimmy's like unbelievable, he beats players for fun here and there. Now, I want them to try and play one touch or two touch. I mean, I put them on a constraint because, it's like I say, when and where, what's what I'm looking for my players. I just think as well, just like as we getting near the end of the show here, just, I mentioned this the other day. I was talking to Zeb Jacobs on the My Personal Football Coach podcast. He's new head of coach at Rangers, and he was saying the same, like, he loves a 1v1 duel. He loves that bit. And we both said, too much reliance on rondos and possession stuff at an early age. What you find is, what I've seen, when I'm traveling or presenting at these conferences or just doing sessions, is that when you ask a player to solve a problem themselves, you put them in a little 1v1 or a 2v2 where there's no overload, they really struggle, because they're used to just getting out, pop it, playing safe passes, sideways, pop. Do you know what I mean? You say, actually, no, well, I want you to solve the problem yourself here. Do you know what I mean? That boy or that girl's got to say, no, you got to break the line yourself, whether it's pass forward or breaking pressure or dribbling forward, you got to do it. And that's a real, obviously important, unique skill set. Talking about the 1v1 duel again, is that's really important. And I just find when I see all those, players that, they're playing those under sevens, under eight students, rondos all the time, which is great. I mean, like Man City got a good balance. I've watched them. They do loads of possession stuff, but like the younger age foundation, lots of 1v1, loads of ball mastery, lots of different variations. You know what I mean? And when you get older, you can be a bit more specific and say, right, now it's about moving the ball. Do you know what I mean? So I just think that's really important. From when I always think about it, I say, yeah, I want my teams to be able to move the ball, play one or two touch, keep possession. But if you want to develop those players, you can also break the lines with the ball at their feet. Then they're not going to do that unless you give them the opportunity to do that and train it a lot. Has that real key part of your culture. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely, mate. And what I would say, to be careful with coaches, especially at grassroots, and I'll be honest, I was really guilty of doing this myself, especially in my early 20s or late teens when I first started coaching. In the first 5 years of coaching, so I think I wanted everything to look good. Oh, great passing patterns look good. It looks nice and neat, and everyone comes over and applauds your session. Great. But now I look at it the opposite. I think, wow, this session's got to get a bit messier here at times. It's got to get a bit chaotic. We've got to create a bit of discomfort in our possession sessions. It's far too easy. Like chucking that spoiler in there, like a Kante, to run around like a rabbit and put the pressure on the ball, or squashing the pitch because it's far too easy. Because if your starting point is you go in with a perfect looking paint by numbers football session, where's your session going to go from there? Where's the problems to solve? And it's really interesting. You said about a fella at Glasgow Rangers, that the problem solving is the key thing here, Saul, isn't it? Because it's all about finding a solution to the game. And the complexity is, because there are so many potential solutions, because if you press pause when Kevin De Bruyne's got the ball at his feet, there'll be lots of options. But it's about finding one and finding a good one. And I think I talk about responsible sort of responsibilities, and take responsibility. I use that word a lot with my coaching. Take responsibility. You play the pass. Stop passing past the ball. You drop your shoulder. And then, but also, it's a play on words a little bit, but you've got to be responsible, but you've got to be response able. If you can't respond to the situation in front of you, and you haven't got that response mechanism, and your response is, oh, I'm scared, just pass it to Saul and let Saul go and do it because Saul's a better player.
Exactly.
That's where us as coaches have really got to intervene, because yes, Saul might be the best player in the group, but I'm never going to be at my best or get to my best if I'm allowed to keep getting away with it. So as a skills coach, be mindful of that. And
also, when you're working at academy football, the highest level, that's what it's about. We've got players, you've got to challenge your players and develop players who can take that. Otherwise, what chance have they got if you never give them the chance to do that, right? They're going to have to put in about getting a contract down the line. Just partly, I think you made a good point there about the chaos, isn't it? It's, again, come back to the original point. What it looks like at the Premier League at the highest level, with your Liverpools and your Man Cities, doesn't look like that at the youngest. Do you know what I mean? It's a long road to get there, right? Don't feel. I don't think you should, hopefully don't feel the pressure that you should, your under 9s, under 10s should be trying to replicate the way Guardiola plays. You want that chaos, you want that, that messy sessions. I think that's really important, isn't it? But last word on this, Glenn. What was, any last takeaways on your possession?
Yeah, so 2 or 3 things, like we say. I always still keep bringing it back to the individual. And I know we're going on a lot about this 1v1 duel, but you are trying to produce individual footballers that then go and fit into a team. And all a team is anyway, isn't it, is an accumulation of individual parts. So if you've got loads, so Barcelona were a slightly weaker team recently in terms of efficiency. Why? Because they never had some of the Ferraris, and they've added that to their game. And they're now going to complement the wonderful passes of the ball. So keep bringing it back to your individuals. Be skillful in your session design. So don't worry about doing a possession game, because if there is an overload, always remember there's still an underloaded team. So if tonight we're going to play 5v3s or 4v2s, do whatever maths you want. Yes, one team are going to get a bit more time on the ball and be able to play the spare man, and they have to do that because it's part of football. But again, bring your focus back. Remember, there's two teams in there. You're always coaching the attacking and defending. So the team of three, when the three win it and they're overloaded, set them a really extreme individual target. So you as a three now, can you combine and get clever passes to break out, or can you stay on the ball to twist and turn and break out and even put little goals at the end? So again, that's just about skillful management of your session. And you're not just coaching the possession team, you're also coaching the counter possession team as well. And there could be some absolutely outstanding individual outcomes within that overload practice session as well.
Excellent. Cheers, done as usual. And also, look, guys, if you've got any questions or any ideas for topics for shows or pick guests you'd like to see on the show, just drop us a line. You can email me, Saul at mypersonalfootballcoach.com, or on Twitter, myfootballcoach, or message the coaching family page. But thanks for listening. Glenn, thanks very much, mate, again. And I hope you're having a good day out there. And I'll see you next week.
Cheers, mate. Take care.
Welcome to the Coaching Family Soccer Coaching Podcast, a podcast for soccer coaches from grassroots to the pro game. Soccer coaches who love the game, love coaching, and want to get better. Join our community on Twitter @Coaching Family.